For today's session, we have Kushagra with us. So we are trying to do this the next step series, which tries to speak to different people and understand their career path and the the decisions that they took while making those choices. So welcome, Kushagra.
Thank you.
So Kushagra, before we start, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm from New Delhi, actually a suburb called Gurgaon. Many people might know it already. So I grew up there, did all my schooling there up till 10th standard. Then I went to New Delhi for 11th and 12th. I've studied aeronautical engineering in Manipal for bachelor's. And for my master degree, I came to Netherlands to pursue MSc in aerospace engineering. So now I'm specialized in flight performance and propulsion. So that's aircraft design and engine design. And currently I work as a research engineer in the same university. And now I work with helicopters.
So I wanted to speak about the time when you were doing your engineering, right? So what was your thought process like at that point of time when you were thinking about jobs and placements?
Well, for second year, first year is common for most engineering studies. So second year is where we got into our respective branches. So at that point of time, I was not thinking about jobs at all. I wanted to focus more on studies. When third year started, that's when I started thinking, because primarily, we had to do internships. So I started looking for internship assignments. Now that's where I figured that in India, at least, mostly it's government facilities which do most of the research and development or manufacturing in aerospace sector. Or that includes DRDO, HAL, Indian Space Research Organization, so on and so forth. Private players are entering the market, but they are either just starting or they prefer taking students from IITs or NITs. So it was an issue there. So I did my internship in HAL at in the summer break of the third year, and that's where I figured that I know very little about my own field. So there's a lot more to discover, not discover, personally to discover and explore. So I definitely need to do a master's degree, because I was more into the whys and the hows of all the theoretical things we were studying. So a master's was a good way to go, and possibly a research career after that. I was not much hands-on in anything. So manufacturing sector was not what I wanted to work in. So that's when I decided, yeah, master's is a way to go.
Okay. And before, going for your master's, did you think about this, that let me work for some time and then I'll, go and pursue a master's degree? Or were you always sure that, master's is something that makes sense?
Well, I was sure that master's is something which makes sense, because if I don't do a master's now, then there is usually what happens is there is a gap in your education, and then you lose track, and your mentality becomes more of a corporate one. So you have trouble getting back into study. So I immediately went into masters, and I believe that with the degree I get after the masters, I'll be able to find a suitable job.
Okay.
So that was my thought process. But a lot of people also prefer to work before to get more industrial exposure. So
Okay.
it's a matter of preference.
Yeah. And if you can also talk about, like when was it when you were really sure that, masters is something that I will go forward for? So when and how did you decide that?
Well, third year was when I was pretty sure I wanted to do masters. So what I started doing was looking for courses I wanted to do. So specifically in areas I was interested in. So my interests were helicopter engineering or engine and aircraft design. So I started looking for universities which offered these specific courses, and universities have their specific fields where they focus a lot more. For example, I did masters in TU Delft. Their focus area is aircraft design as well as wind energy, since wind energy sector is quite popular in Netherlands. So each university has that kind of focus area. So that's how I figured what universities would be good for me, and then I'll cross-reference them with QS rankings. So once I had my list, I started applying. So I did apply in US universities. So I think I applied to Caltech, Georgia Tech, Purdue, and in Netherlands I applied to TU Delft, and in other European countries, ETH Zurich, KTH Sweden, etc. I had a list of about 20-25 universities. So there are those were high risk or safe universities, which usually people categorize them with based on how easy it is to get in or not. TU Delft was one of the high risk universities. It ranked about fourth or fifth in mechanical engineering at that time. But I got an acceptance from there, so I just struck off all the universities which were below in ranking compared to TU Delft. So that was the specific process I followed to get into a master degree properly.
Sure. Actually, you spoke about the things that you did to shortlist schools and to shortlist the courses that you want to do. But if you could also elaborate on this and probably give a few tips or pointers that would be helpful for people who could be looking at an MS degree at this point of time. What should be a few things that they should keep in mind?
First thing to do is figure out what you are very interested in. That's the thing you need to worry about the most. People might be interested in space systems engineering, in my particular field that is, or other things, or manufacturing engineering per se. So that's where you need to figure out. If you consider, say somebody says I'm interested in CFD, that's a very broad field and it's more like a tool to get to a goal. So you won't be able to find good enough master programs which support you there. So you really need to try to figure out a research area where you want to get into, or if not a research area, you want to do manufacturing engineering, that then you need to find in universities which offer such tailor-made courses. So when you've done that, then you can go into shortlisting the universities which meet those criteria. Other things you can look at are tuition costs and cost of living and things like that. So motivation for a master degree usually comes if you do internships during your bachelor's education. For me, it was, I wanted to do a master. I have more caliber as in the research field rather than manufacturing engineering. So that's what tips the scale towards master degree. If you want to go into manufacturing, then there is a different process, and maybe somebody else can guide you there because I took the research path. So
Sure. So if you can also, talk about like what kind of career paths exist after this kind of an MS that you did, right? And you have been a researcher since your graduation. So what
yes.
exactly does a researcher do? If you can, talk about that also.
Well, for with a master degree like I have, there are two career paths, actually three. One is going into manufacturing industry in the big market players like Airbus or Boeing. But that's a little harder to get into because these companies look more towards mechanical engineers who they can train and make them do specific work. So as per my understanding, for every aerospace engineer they hire, there would be 5 or 6 mechanical or electrical engineers working as well. So that is one option, but it's a little hard. So if you are hell-bent on working in these specific big market players, then it would be better to do specific courses which make you attractive to these companies. Second line of work would be research and development in these big companies. That is also harder to get into, but it sort of is possible. So then you do the research for these companies, and then the manufacturing engineers build what you researched into. The third path is academic careers. So that's what I wanted to do as well. So the pathway for that is doing higher education. So a step further than a master degree. So the PhD is a way to go into this. Then you get into assistant, get tenured as an assistant professor and continue your academic career then on. So for me, a PhD is on the cards still. But what I do right now is in between a PhD and a master degree. So I do the engineering work in any specific project, and PhDs do the more conceptual stuff. So, like in my job profile right now, I develop mathematical models which can design helicopters, and then those got incorporated into a software which automates all these design processes. So additional responsibilities I have include assisting professors in grading exams or giving lectures and things like that. So it's similar to a PhD, but you don't get a degree in the end, and the requirements you have which are imposed on you are a lot less strict compared to PhDs. So PhDs need to do graduate schools and other courses and they need to finish in 4 years. So my job profile is more like a stepping stone to a PhD and onwards to an academic career.
Okay. I think you mentioned that academics is something where you see yourself, right, in future. So if you can talk about how do you see your career path evolving? Like the end goal is academic career, but like how do you plan on reaching there? So if you can talk about that.
Well, right now that career path is a mess because of COVID-19. But without that, after my research tenure would have ended, I would have gone into a PhD program. So 4 years into that, and then when you finish that, you get your PhD. Then you get hired as a postdoc researcher or an assistant professor. If it's a postdoc researcher, it's again in between a PhD and an assistant professor, and it's more like a natural progression into that. So once you get tenured as an assistant professor, then you start climbing through the ranks and assistant professor, full professor, chair of faculty, so on and so forth. So yeah, but now may have to shift into the industry and then see where things go. But the plan was to get into a PhD program and continue forward.
Cool. So Kushagra, this brings me to the last question actually, which I have. So it is that, if like, what would be your recommendation for people who are exploring different career options at this point of time and probably are looking at something what you are also doing? And if you can give guidance from the perspective of, let's say, an undergrad student also who today is looking at, or thinking about this kind of a career path that I want to do an MS or a PhD. So what would be a few things that you think they should keep in mind?
Well, first advice I would give is that figure out what career path you exactly want to choose. Do you have research caliber, or do you want to do industry and manufacturing engineering? So the way to do that is to do internships. What I did was I did just one internship for the sake of ticking the box, and that is a bit risky to do. So if you are able to do multiple internships in different fields, so you can work in IISc Bangalore. That's a well-renowned. That's a research center properly. Then you can also work in companies as interns where you do manufacturing engineering. So do all of these and then figure out what you like most and do it with an open mind. While you're doing it simultaneously, you can consider what your specific interests are. If you're into manufacturing engineering, that's it. You do a master's degree in that direction. But if you want to do research, then you need to narrow down the research area you want to work in. So for me, that was, I've already told you, aircraft design, helicopter engineering, gas turbines, and so on and so forth. So don't keep it very broad like CFD, but don't keep it very narrow as well, such that you don't have any kind of wiggle room. So when you've done these two things and you've decided on which direction you want to go in. So if you want to do manufacturing engineering, do additional vocational training or internships, such that you become, more attractive to these companies. You have hands-on experience. Take up courses in welding or things like that, so that, you can demonstrate to your potential employers that, hey, I'm a hands-on person, I can work here. If you are into research, then you need to develop a conceptual oriented thought process. You need to worry about the how and why of each thing you see in the world. So that's how engineers work. We try to answer questions in the research field. And that's what academic researchers typically do. If you're also working in research, you might want to learn coding. So Python is a very good starting point. It's open source, and so is C++. The thing is that if you are in any kind of research field, you will be writing code at some point in your life. Either to just process the data you get, make plots or something like that, or you will do more extensive work. Like I did software development, so I had to learn quite a lot on the fly. So if you are, potentially okay with coding and you don't have problems building algorithms, then you can switch between languages based on what the requirement is. So that also goes a long way. And now typically a lot of these research-oriented jobs in the industry or PhD programs, etc., they want engineers who can code. So the difference between me and a software engineer who has a degree in computer science or IT would be that I know how to code, but my base is aerospace engineering. So I will write a functional code. It's going to not look pretty, but it will do what it's supposed to do, which is probably design an aircraft. So yeah, that's the advice I would give.
Cool. So I think this was like really very insightful, because these are a few points which people usually do not, get to know about, and they get to know about this when it is too late. So I think this was really very insightful. So thank you so much, Kushagra, for doing this.
I'm happy to help. I did not have these insights when I started out. So now if I look back, I wish that I had this kind of knowledge. So, but yeah, experience makes you a better person.
Sure.
So if someone learns from my experience, then